In the cold heart of Siberia lies Nadzino Island, a name absent from most history books, but infamous for a few horrific weeks in 1933. For thousands, it became a place of unimaginable suffering, earning the chilling nickname Cannibal Island. The island itself is a narrow swampy strip, surrounded by the freezing Ob River, isolated, barren, and utterly inhospitable. No shelter, no tools, no food, just a patch of wilderness chosen as a natural prison. Over 6,000 people were sent here, not hardened criminals, but ordinary citizens caught in a brutal government campaign. Many were peasants, city dwellers, or simply people without proper documents, labeled as socially harmful elements. Promised a new life, they were instead abandoned to the wild, left to survive or perish. Nadzino's story is a descent into the darkest corners of human behavior, where civilization is stripped away and only desperation remains. It's a chapter hidden for decades, buried in Soviet archives, but the truth demands to be heard. What happens when people are pushed to the absolute limit? Nadzino Island provides a chilling answer. The events here force us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature. This is not just a forgotten tragedy, it's a warning from history. The silence around Nadzino was deliberate, but the suffering was real. Today we remember those lost, and the lessons their ordeal teaches us. The story of Cannibal Island begins here, on a desolate strip of land in Siberia. To understand Nadzino, we must look at Stalin's Soviet Union in the early 1930s. Stalin's vision transformed the USSR into an industrial giant, using Siberia's vast, empty lands. The state needed labor and control, so it introduced internal passports, labeling anyone without papers as undesirable. Peasants fleeing famine, the unemployed, and the unlucky were swept up in mass arrests. The plan cleansed cities like Moscow and Leningrad, and send the undesirables to settle Siberia. In reality, these people were disposable labor, rounded up in chaotic street raids and loaded onto trains. There was no trial, no process, just quotas to fill and lives to discard. The authorities promised new beginnings, but delivered only exile and suffering. This careless, inhumane policy set the stage for disaster. The grand plan was built on human suffering from the start. Nadzino was not an accident, it was the result of a system that valued ideology over lives. The tragedy that followed was inevitable. The machinery of the state had already begun to crush those it deemed unworthy. The journey to Nadzino was a nightmare before the island was even reached. Deportees were packed into filthy cattle cars, no room to sit, little food, and rampant disease. Typhus swept through the trains. The dead were left with the living until the next stop. Survivors arrived in Tomsk, only to be herded into freezing, overcrowded barracks. Many died before ever seeing the island. From Tomsk, they were loaded onto open river barges, cargo vessels, not meant for people. The Siberian spring was merciless. Cold winds, rain, and snow battered the starving, weakened prisoners. Food rations were almost non-existent, sometimes just raw flour, mixed with dirty river water. Hundreds more died on the river, their bodies discarded along the way. By the time the barges reached Nadzino, the survivors were barely human, hollowed by hunger and despair. The journey was a relentless test of endurance, stripping away dignity and hope. The guards were brutal, treating the deportees with contempt and violence. Any resistance was met with beatings or worse. The ordeal was far from over. The true horror was just beginning. Nadzino awaited, a final destination worse than anyone could imagine. In late May 1933, the barges reached Nadzino Island. Over 3,000 people stumbled ashore, exhausted, sick, and starving. There was nothing, no shelter, no tools, no food. The guards remained on the barges, rifles ready, watching from a distance. The first night brought freezing rain and wind. Nearly 300 people froze to death. The survivors awoke to a nightmare, trapped on a barren island, surrounded by icy water and armed guards. Days later, the authorities dumped raw flour on the shore, sparking a deadly stampede. Starving people fought and trampled each other for a handful of flour. With no way to cook it, they mixed it with river water, leading to deadly disease. The island was too small and barren to support life. Chaos and violence erupted almost immediately. Gangs formed, preying on the weak, stealing food and valuables. Anyone with gold teeth was in mortal danger, killed for what little they had. The social fabric unraveled in days. Survival became the only law. The guards watched with indifference, sometimes fueling the violence. Nazino had become a microcosm of hell. The descent into savagery had only just begun. Within a week, Nazino Island lost all traces of civilization. Gangs, often real criminals, ruled by terror, hunting the weak for scraps of food or clothing. People ate anything: bark, roots, frogs, mice, until nothing was left. Hunger drove them mad, erasing reason and compassion. The guards, detached and cruel, sometimes traded bread for gold or used starving women for sex. The dead were everywhere, ignored by the living, who were too desperate to care. The stench of death and disease filled the air. Cries of the dying echoed across the island. The social order had inverted. Compassion and dignity were replaced by brutality and survival at any cost. The guards' indifference made them complicit in the unfolding horror. Nazino became a landscape of death, where the strong preyed on the weak. The most basic human values were extinguished by suffering. The island was no longer a settlement. It was a nightmare. The worst was yet to come. Hunger pushed Nazino's survivors over the final edge. Cannibalism. Within 10 days, people began eating the dead. Soon, gangs hunted the living, killing the weakest for meat. Victims were tied to trees, butchered alive, and left to die slowly. Cannibalism became open, a new normal in the struggle to survive. The island's name, Cannibal Island, was now a grim reality. When officials finally visited, they found human flesh hanging from trees, organs roasting over fires. Survivors lived in terror, fearing both starvation and their fellow prisoners. One woman hid in a tree, telling a guard she'd been kept alive by a cannibal who killed and ate others. Local villagers witnessed the horror: flesh cooked over fires, bodies mutilated for food. Stories emerged of mothers feeding children their own flesh, girls mutilated to keep them alive as food sources. The evidence was undeniable. Nazino had become a butcher's shop of human beings. The line between survival and savagery had vanished. The island's descent was complete. Cannibal Island was no longer just a name, it was a living nightmare. The truth of Nazino Island survived thanks to a few brave individuals. Vasily Velichko, a local Communist Party instructor, defied orders to investigate the rumors. His secret report, marked top secret, documented the horror in unflinching detail. Survivors told him of guards who tried to protect loved ones, only to return and find them eaten by cannibals. Gangs hunted the weak, mutilating and consuming them. One girl was found tied to a tree, her body butchered while she was still alive. Velichko's report gave voice to the victims, turning statistics into unbearable human tragedy. He also recorded the fate of those who tried to escape. Bodies washed up on riverbanks, hands and feet bound, stones tied to their necks. Most were shot, hunted, or drowned. Velichko's courage preserved the truth, even as the state tried to erase it. His report was a rare act of conscience in a time of silence. The survivors' stories are a testament to the human cost of cruelty and neglect. Without them, Nazino would have remained a forgotten nightmare. Their voices demand to be heard. Velichko's report reached Moscow, its horrors too great to ignore. An official investigation confirmed the catastrophe. Nazino was a disaster of epic proportions. The project was halted and survivors evacuated. Of over 6,000, only about 2,000 remained alive. Most were gravely ill or traumatized. Many died soon after. A few low-level officials were punished, but only for negligence, not for the suffering they caused. The architects of the policy faced no consequences. The state buried the story. Velichko was fired, his report locked away. For 50 years, Cannibal Island was erased from history, known only to survivors and silent officials. The island returned to wilderness, its secrets hidden beneath the swamp. Only in the late 1980s, during Glasnost, did the truth emerge. Human rights activists uncovered Velichko's report, revealing the full horror to the world. The silence was finally broken. Cannibal Island's victims could no longer be forgotten. Nazino Island is more than a gruesome story. It's a warning. It shows what happens when people are reduced to numbers, stripped of dignity and rights. The Soviet state's dehumanization paved the way for atrocity. The victims were ordinary people, not monsters. starvation and terror erased the line between civilization and savagery. Remembering Nazino is an act of justice, restoring dignity to those erased by history. Their suffering warns us, morality and compassion are fragile, easily lost in times of crisis. We must defend human dignity, even when it's inconvenient. The temptation to dehumanize, to sacrifice individuals for ideology, remains a danger today. History is not just the past, it's a lesson for the future. The story of Cannibal Island reminds us, never let any government convince you that some lives are worth less than others. If we forget, we risk repeating history's worst mistakes. The victims of Nazino have no graves, so we must carry their memory. Their story is a warning we cannot afford to ignore.